everyone. Today we are going to discuss a very important chapter when it comes to your history, your world history, and that chapter indeed is Cold War. Okay, so we've already seen how the World War ended, and how it demanded for a formation of United Nations organization. Number one, but carrying forward that ideology, we immediately stepped into the Cold War era. Now, see, when we talk about the World War era, we saw two powers at play. Um, just a second. Yep. So we saw two powers at play. We saw the Axis powers and the Allied powers. Okay. So number one, we saw First World War. Okay, how it ended, and First World War hardly had any influence when we talk about the Cold War era. But when we talk about the Second World War, it becomes very important to understand Axis powers and Allied powers. Okay, so all of you already know Axis powers. They were the Trinity, like we can call it: Germany, Italy, and Japan. Germany, Italy, and Japan. And in allied powers, we had US, UK, not Russia, USSR, China, right? France was also this side. Okay, so these were the powers when we talk about the allied powers. We saw that this side, the allied powers, they emerged victorious in the war, in the World War. And so now what was supposed to happen? We saw the condition of Japan. Italy was totally subdued. Okay. And Germany had to face, the wrath, the immediate wrath. See, even Japan had a very, I feel that the worst thing that happened during the entire was what happened with Japan. And something that happened with Japan was not actually, required. The war had ended. We did not want the US to drop two bombs just to show that it has those bombs. So what happened with Japan was, of course, you cannot justify that action. Till date, it cannot be justified. Okay. But nonetheless, our focus is now going to be Germany. We saw Germany had to be totally subdued, and it had to pay a lot of amount to, as war remunerations. Okay, and even Germany was divided into four zones. One was the eastern zone was for Russia, or you can call it USSR. We had France, US, UK. Now, this zone itself has Berlin also, and about Berlin we'll discuss a little later. Okay. Fight was for Germany. Similar thing happened with Austria as well. Austria was also divided into four zones. Okay. Fight was for Germany. Okay. Now we saw that among all this, China was still focusing on its own, the country's development right now. So it withdrew its focus for the time being from the World War scene. We moved to USSR. It had a great interest over here. We moved to US. It also had a great interest over here. And so did UK. Russia had already taken over a lot of territories in 1939. USSR had taken over a lot of territories in 1939. But while it was doing that, we saw that Hitler was constantly, posing a great threat to Russia. And he gave a very tough fight to Russia. Okay. And it had to face a lot of losses simultaneously. USSR had to face a lot of losses. And you will, in the next few slides, you will see what USSR did to regain, or to, yeah, regain it's the compensation for those losses. We'll see in a while. Okay. But what I'm trying to tell you over here is that these emerging powers themselves faced a clash. And why did the clash result into just a bipolar clash or bipolar world and not a multipolar world, seeing that so many emerging nations are here? The clash was not between nations right now, the clash was between ideologies right now. Communism versus capitalism. So the clash was between ideologies and not between nations. Where we see that capitalist nations, US, UK, France, they come together. USSR is the communist nation. China is also a communist nation, but China, it's right now working on its own thing. All right. So this is just a situation, a build-up of the situation I'm telling you. Okay. There were many other reasons why the war happened, but basically the war happened because of this clash of ideologies between the two powers, the capitalist powers and the communist powers. Communist powers being represented by Russia and the capitalist powers being represented by, of course, US and UK and France, maybe. All right. Okay. Having said that, let's move ahead. So in this chapter, we'll discuss about World War One, Berlin blockade, Korean War / Vietnam War. Okay. NAM, we won't take it. It's not very important for students of ISC. We don't, it's not very important, so we will not do it. We'll take Cuban Missile Crisis and we'll see the de-escalation of the war. Okay, I'll give you a glimpse into formation of NAM and how is India related to NAM, but it's not very important for you all. So I'm just, before I give you a glimpse into it, I'm telling you beforehand. Okay, why am I going to teach you is that you can have a connection. You can connect the dots between a lot of events that happen in our history, and you understand the relevance of the war as well when it comes to India. So we'll take it for that purpose, but it's a very short, we'll take it for a short span. If you're studying ISC oriented, and which lecturers, of course, are going to be ISC oriented, so you can skip that part also if you don't want to, understand the connection between World War and how did India come into scene. You can just skip that portion. Okay. All right. Moving ahead. See, USSR or Union of Soviet Socialist Republic 1917 created. Okay. Socialist revolution in Russia happened. Okay. Socialist revolution can also be called Bolshevik revolution. Now please understand how this socialist revolution during and after World War One led to another clash between the capitalist and the communist ideologies. See, what happened is that this Bolshevik revolution was actually to replace Tsar from his position. Okay, Tsar from his position. Okay, so this is why the revolution happened, and the ideologies was to establish a communist regime and remove Tsar from his position. That was the ideology. And these Tsars, the supporters of Tsars, were the whites, whereas the communist revolution, the ones who were trying to establish the communist regime, they were called the reds. Okay, now what happened? These were fighting against him. Okay, revolution within the country. But when the Western powers, they saw that this might establish communism in one nation and simultaneously in other nations, they stepped in and supported this side. Okay, so that is one point of difference. They stepped in, they supported this side. So though Tsar was defeated and there was no result of the support, but the Reds got to know that the Western powers are against communism, and they were hell-bent on establishing their own powers, because of course they saw Western powers are not going to help them in the long run, and they are just going to offer an opposition. So these powers, they went on a decision to establish their own regime throughout the world. Okay, not just their nation, throughout the world. Second World War, Eastern European countries that Soviet had liberated from fascist forces came under USSR. And we see this also, that there were a lot of countries which Soviet had liberated from the fascist forces, that's from Italy. They all came under USSR. And that happened in East Europe. Please remember. East Europe. And East Europe, two countries could not come, Greece and Turkey, and we'll see why in a while. Okay? The Soviet, it lagged behind the West in technology, in infrastructure, okay, and most importantly, in fulfilling the political or economic aspirations of citizens. This is again a later story, not a part of your curriculum. Okay, this happens when we see we're going to discuss this in the de-escalation, where we talk about the Gorbachev reforms. So this comes later. Okay, food imports increased every year. The Soviet economy was faltering in the late 1970s and became stagnant. So partly you got a hint of why the Soviet declined, and what led to the breaking of Soviet into so many countries. Okay, and what led to the emergence of Russia. This you've got over here. But we'll see the build-up of all these events step by step. Okay, let's start with the year 1945, Yalta Conference. Now, Yalta Conference was actually a meeting of the Allied powers, okay, held from Feb 4 to 11 in Yalta on the Crimean Peninsula. The main participants were Franklin D. Roosevelt, US, Winston Churchill, Britain or UK, and Joseph Stalin of Soviet Union. And the decisions made at the Yalta Conference, they are very important when we talk about the post-World War era. Number one, the first decision was division of Germany. I already told you that Germany was supposed to be divided into 4 blocks. Okay, 4 occupation zones. Each to be administered by US. Actually, this major area was Soviet. Okay, UK, France. Okay. Now, Berlin was located over here in the Soviet zone. But what happened with Berlin? Berlin was also divided into 4 sectors. USSR, US, UK, France. Okay. And a similar thing was done with Austria. This was the first thing that happened, that was decided during the Yalta Conference. Next, Nazi war criminals were to be punished. Number 1. Liberal reforms were to be introduced in Germany. And of course, you saw that how Germany was forced to pay the war losses. Okay. See, you will see that after the division of the 4 zones of Germany, the 3 zones of UK, US and France, they tried to, recuperate the economy of Germany. They tried to restore the economy, okay? And they tried to, make Germany a livable place for that time. But they were the ones who brought Germany into this stage. Heavy reparation. Okay? So, I'm not saying that they were at fault or anything. That was a result of war and, you had to do it. Just giving you the facts. Next, Poland's borders. Now, see, Poland was a very important issue when we talk about World War and we talk about post-World War era. And this particular issue was discussed in the Yalta Conference. The issue of Poland's post-war borders, it was a major point of discussion. The leaders agreed that Poland would be reconstituted as an independent and sovereign state. And its borders were supposed to be adjusted, moving westward into German territory and eastward, border shifting eastward. Okay? Incorporating territory from pre-war Poland into the Soviet Union. Even the communist government formed included a new non-communist members of Polish government who were in exile in London. So basically what happened is that they decided that Poland's borders need to be readjusted rather. Okay, so the western border is gonna move west into Germany, and eastern border will shift eastward. Okay, so eastward, as in it's gonna incorporate territory from pre-war Poland, and that territory will now be a part of Soviet Union. Okay, eastern border will move. And the eastern border shifting eastward, incorporating territory from pre-war Poland into the Soviet Union. So that particular territory, which was a part of Soviet Union, that was gonna be again a part of Poland. Okay, even the communist government formed included a few non-communist members of Polish government. Now see what happened is, though Poland was being formed, but Soviet was ruling over here, and Soviet, why would it give it? It had captured it. So Soviet formed a communist government in Poland, but pre capturing of Germany. Okay, there were a few non-communist members who were a part of Polish regime before Poland was captured. These members, few of these non-communist members, they were also included in the communist regime of Poland. Okay, so this particular issue of Poland was discussed, but USSR was something which was it had its own interest over here, and you'll come to know of those interests in a while. See, Russia had already got South Sakhalin, Kuril Islands, and Port Arthur. Okay, plus in the Yalta conference, it was also recognized that Russia does have its authority over South Mongolia. Russia got some territories of Manchuria as well. So Russian interests were not overlooked, because you participated in the war, you get these territories as a part of the war. It was also decided that there will be free elections in Eastern Europe. Okay, the leaders discussed the fate of Eastern European countries. See, because what has happened is all this entire Eastern European countries, which were a part of now USSR, they were a part of Nazi regime under Hitler. So when they were freed from the Nazi regime, they needed a free election over here. Okay, so elections were allowed over here, but since Soviet slowly took control of these areas, okay, it did not fully uphold the part of this commitment that we're gonna hold free elections. This term free thing was compromised in Eastern Europe. We'll discuss that once again in a few minutes. Okay, so a lot of countries felt under Soviet influence, okay, and communist control. So USSR did not let everything to be done particularly freely. Then a formation for United Nations, of course, we've discussed it, that the Yalta Conference, it played a very important role in the establishment of UN, okay, because the leaders agreed that we do need a post-war international organization so that we could promote peace and security, which led to the creation of UN later in 1945. Now, another thing, Declaration on Liberated Europe. The leaders, they issued declaration affirming their commitment to creating democratic institutions in liberated European countries and allowing the people of those nations to choose their form of government. A very important thing. Try to understand over here. The leaders of the Allied power, they said, and not all the leaders, but it was decided that the countries which have been liberated, okay, especially the East European countries, they were supposed to be given their own rights and freedom over themselves. And basically the idea was, even when you were saying their own rights and freedoms, their own rights and freedom was for setting up of a democratic institution in each of these countries, where people are electing their representatives. The government is being formed of the people, by the people, for the people. Okay, that's what Lincoln said. So their idea was of democratization. But go back and try to understand. Capitalism is all about democracy, which opposes communism. So do you think Stalin would agree to it? Stalin would not agree to it because establishment of democratic institutions goes against the ideals or ideologies of communism. Okay? So this was one thing again which you will see was impacted later. Okay? Because USSR actually tried to assert its influence over here. After the Yalta conference, we had a Potsdam conference in 1945. Okay, this was the last of the World War II meetings held between the leaders of the Allied powers. Took place from July 17 to August 2 in Potsdam. Potsdam is actually in Berlin, Germany. Okay, and the the participants over here, Truman, Harry S. Truman. Actually, Harry S. Truman succeeded Franklin D. Roosevelt as a president of the United States. Winston Churchill, and later on you will see that Winston Churchill was of course replaced by Clement Attlee, because Attlee became the he won the general election and he became the Prime Minister of UK. Then we had Joseph Stalin, of course, USSR. The Potsdam Conference addressed several key issues in the aftermath of World War II. Number one was occupation of Germany. See, it confirmed and expanded upon the foursome division of Germany, okay, that was agreed upon in Yalta conference, okay, and those four people, of course, you know, US, UK, France, USSR. It talked about demilitarization and denazification. See, it talked about, number one, it said that Germany will have no military of its own. Demilitarization. Okay? And denazification. Every member of the Nazi party or every follower of Nazism, they were kept in check, and this ideology of Nazism was completely removed from Germany. Okay, the Allies sought to dismantle Germany's war potential and the influence of the Nazi Party. See, beat Hitler, beat Mussolini, any leader, they've had an ideology, and that ideology they've spread in the masses. Something coming from your own people, you're more liable to accept that rather than something coming from, you know, others. Now, the idea over here is that even though Hitler has been subdued, okay, even though, you know, Germany could not once again unite under Hitler, we know this. But there might be some other power which could, from the Nazi ideology, step up, right? Step up and, you know, pose a threat to the world. So it was very important to totally remove this ideology. And as it is, the world was facing so many other ideologies, the ideology of socialism, communism, capitalism, okay, various forms of socialism and stuff. So it wasn't very important for, you know, I mean, not important, but it wasn't very, you know, practical for the leaders to let Nazism flourish. And even when the leader who spread it is no more. War crime trials, the leaders agreed to hold war crime trials to prosecute those individuals who were responsible for war crimes and atrocities committed during the war. If you all remember, one thing that could include over there is the Holocaust, the German Holocaust against the Jews. Okay, the Nuremberg trials. Okay, all of these, the ones who committed this, okay, they were supposed to be tried. And the Potsdam Conference once again reaffirmed the decisions made at the Yalta regarding the western and eastern borders of Poland. See, what happened is this thing was not agreed in the Yalta Conference. Let me tell you why. The Oder-Neisse line, they were rivers, and you know, Russia, it took these areas under its controls without any unanimous decision. It just took those areas thinking that it's right to take those areas. Okay. Nonetheless, they were put as a new western border, resulting in a lot of territorial changes when we talk about Poland. Okay. Then Germans were to be expelled from Poland. Okay, expelled from Czechoslovakia and other East European countries, because we see Germany had taken over almost the entire East European nation. So it was decided that Germans will be expelled from Poland, Czechoslovakia, and Eastern European countries. Okay, this decision, it has a great impact on German population in these regions. Okay, and this Potsdam Conference itself led to a lot of tensions between Western allies and the Soviet Union. Soviet, it tried to establish its influence in Eastern Europe. Okay, especially in Poland. I told you, in Poland, it was exercising its own control, taking over areas which were not agreed to upon the entire, the Allied powers. Okay, so this conference actually became a deciding factor for the rising tensions. The declaration on Japan. See, Potsdam Declaration on July 26, 1945, it called for the unconditional surrender of Japan. Okay, it outlines the terms of surrender and warned of prompt and utter destruction if Japan did not comply. This declaration set the stage for the later use of atomic bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. You cannot justify this again. So basically, it was said that Japan had to give up. Japan had to surrender. Otherwise, you would have to face prompt and utter destruction if you didn't comply. And that is what they are justifying the Hiroshima and Nagasaki attack by. Okay. So that was the situation of Japan. Now, if you see over here, you will see this is the Iron Curtain, which you can see. Okay. Now try to understand the situation. These are also a part of East Europe, but they were not here because here Western powers stepped in, US. So Greece and Turkey could not be taken by USSR. But every other nation, see, witness it carefully. Germany, the upper part is Germany taken by Soviet. Okay. Poland, whose border was merging with Germany. Okay. This was taken by Poland once again. See, this border shifted this side. Okay. And this border shifted this side. So this area was taken by USSR. Okay. You have Hungary, you have Romania, you have Bulgaria. USSR had its interest jumping into Austria as well, but it's not going to be so easy for them to jump up over here. Okay. So basically you saw an Iron Curtain over here. All the East European nations were taken by USSR. All right. Now let's talk about the causes of Cold War. Okay, what led to Cold War? See, what happened is that Hitler, he had broke the non-aggression pact he had signed with Soviet Union. Okay, and this forced the Soviet Union to join the Allied powers. Initially, Russia was just, away from, it had taken a backstage when it came to the war. But when Hitler broke the non-aggression pact and he stepped and started conquering even the Russian regions, that is when Russia had to step in. Okay, and that is what forced the Soviet to join Allied powers. I told you that the Bolshevik Revolution, it had already replaced Tsar, the dictatorship of the proletariat, and established a communist state. Okay, and Bolsheviks in the World War I, they had already withdrew from World War I because of a civil war going on in their own site. Okay. The political and economic systems of capitalist USA and communist USSR were ideologically incompatible. That is the main reason for the war. Whereas USSR is trying to spread communism in the entire Europe, it's US which is trying to adopt capitalism and spread it out. So this clash of ideologies is what led to the Cold War, of course. Potsdam Conference, July 1945. I already told you about this. See, try to understand one thing. You will see US also jumps into the war at a very later stage. Okay, and that's when it starts to show an active involvement. I won't say it wasn't there in the war, but an active involvement from the US, it's there in a later stage of a war. Okay, Western powers, they wanted Germany as a booming economy. Okay, while Stalin wanted to destroy Germany. So later you will see that when Germany was divided into 4 regions, these regions were flourishing in their economy. But this region was, remember the drain of wealth theory? Same thing was happening over here. It was being completely looted, okay, by the Russian forces. This is what was happening. Okay, so as a result of this, the French, US, and British sectors, they were free to trade. Okay, and of course, a reconstruction in Germany was started. They started to, get back Germany into a stable state. Whereas Stalin, he forbade the Russian zone. Like Stalin said that they may be trading with each other. This zone will not step into a trade with them. Okay. 1947, Bizonia was created. The British and American zones unifiedly economically thanks to new currency. So it was actually British and American zones. Bizonia. Okay. After the trade, what do we say? Trade, emerging of trades between these nations, these countries, these zones, which were France and Britain and UK. So after the zones were merged, they were having a lot of trade among each other. A lot of extensive trade was being done between these nations, whereas of course Russia was out of this entire thing. So to unify them together, this term Bizonia was brought. Bizonia is nothing but it's a combination of American and British zones, occupation zones in Germany. Okay, it was actually created in 1947. British American, it was initially British American, and then French zone also. French zone was added in 1948. Okay, and the new currency that was introduced over here, it was actually Deutschmark. Deutschmark, I don't know how do you pronounce it, but let's try to write it if I am right with the spelling, if I remember the spelling correct. Deutschmark. This was the currency introduced here. Okay, so a new trade zone, new currency, all was going good. But who was not going good? Stalin. Now, all of this angered Stalin. And it wasn't just anger from the creation of so many things, it was a frustration also, which persists. What happens is that we see that the zones, Bizonia, that's the US and French and Americans, British zone, they are flourishing. Okay, but when it comes to the Russian zone, the Soviet zone, it is completely dying out. Okay, so Stalin was completely frustrated because of that, and of course by the unification of these powers also. All right. So having said that, let's move ahead. Now, when Stalin got so angry, he actually led to the Berlin blockade. Berlin blockade will take in a while. Okay. He blocked all the road and rail access to the western part of Berlin. Let's take it in a while. Okay. But we saw formation of alliances on the Western Bloc. Okay, they were coming together, and simultaneously we also saw a nuclear arms race, especially after the bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Why? See, bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki was a turning point in a lot of events and in the ties of USSR with the Western nations, especially US. Now, USSR did not know that US has such an atom bomb. Okay, it had no idea. Everything was kept in secrecy. Suddenly one day they are realizing that US does have this technology. So now USSR is angry. Okay, it has the technology, it is not sharing the formula for the bombs. Okay, and it has that upper hand above us. So USSR became apprehensive of the next few, what's the mindset of US, and what's going to be the next few decisions of US. It kind of went, apprehensive about all of that. Okay. Next, you also saw abrupt termination of Lend-Lease aid from the side of the Western parts. Okay, they also started rejecting Soviet request for a post-war reconstruction loan. Now, Soviet demanded, because war was held in Europe. It was the European nations, European countries which were destroyed. So everybody wanted loan for the reconstruction, but Soviet was declined. Okay, Soviet's request was rejected. Okay, and we also saw that Russia or Soviet had started interfering in the Eastern European countries like Hungary, Poland, Bulgaria, Albania, and Romania, and simultaneously took a control of all these things. What happened after the bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, keeping in mind the events of Yalta and Potsdam Conference also, there was an ideological clash between both the powers. Year 1946, Stalin gave a speech. And in his speech, he said that among capitalism and communism, it can be only one which can emerge victorious. Because capitalism and communism cannot stand together. Okay? And then you also saw that, on the other hand, Winston Churchill came up and he declared that there is now an iron curtain between these two regions, the Western Bloc and the Eastern Bloc in Europe. Okay, as a result of, as a retaliation to Stalin's speech. That's what he said. And in 1948, we see that the communist regime takes over Czechoslovakia. See, Czechoslovakia, communist regime, perfectly fine. But the people over here, they were trying to, what do we say? They were trying to democratize themselves a little bit. And that is what, Stalin did not like. And eventually, he took over Czechoslovakia as well, disrupting the proper elections over there and taking over the region. So now you see Eastern Bloc and Western Bloc taken over. Okay, this is Greece and Turkey are still on the side of US. Other than that, every other bloc has been taken over. Okay. What were the characteristics of Cold War? Please remember, Cold War is not an actual war. The definition of Cold War itself is ideological differences. There was no actual war, but there were ideological differences between both the powers. Number one. So, ideological differences between two powers. Number two, political distrust. I do not trust you, you do not trust me. Okay? And this distrust had been built upon by a lot of incidents. See, Americans or the Western powers were apprehensive of Russia's decision to spread its communism, whereas USSR was apprehensive of, the growing power in terms of military, in terms of science and tech. And, they were apprehensive of what are these Western regimes trying to do, interfering in the, European politics. So all of these things were there. Okay. Arms race. So after the discovery in 1945 of the atom bombs, even USSR aimed for, nuclear weapons now. And simultaneously espionage. Espionage is nothing but spying. Okay. Both the countries' nuclear capacity was increasing. Later on, you will also see we have space wars. When Russia sends Sputnik 1 in, in year 1955. So a very prominent characteristic of Cold War is brinkmanship. And you would quite easily see it in Cuban Missile Crisis. You feel that there is going to be a war. Sooner or later, you will have to face a war. They persist this feeling. But then there is no war. There is no actual war. So US and USSR didn't actually, fight a war among themselves, but there were a lot of proxy wars that happened. Proxy wars in, what do we say, Vietnam, in Korea. Okay, so this fight was actually between capitalism, consumerism rather, and democracy versus communism. Capitalism, consumerism, and democracy versus a government of communism and totalitarianism. Okay, people were people were very apprehensive of this mutually assured destruction, because both the powers sooner or later became, nuclear capable. And people were very apprehensive that in a while, both these powers will destroy each other. Okay? So, mutually assured destruction. See, they had the power, nuclear power, and, why do we say Cuban Missile Crisis becomes a very important event in this entire Cold War? The reason is that Cuban Missile Crisis, it's the perfect example of nuclear capability and how nuclear capability of a nation can act as a deterrent for a war. This takes me back to, an incident in India where the year was 99, the Kargil War, 98, 99. And it was, America stepped in and it said, to Atal Bihari Vajpayee that he was the prime minister that time. And he said that, give up Kashmir because, they are, what do we say, Pakistanis, they are trying to intervene and, they're take over, they're going to bomb you. Pakistan is, nuclearly capable. So, Prime Minister Vajpayee, he said, no problem. Whatever, ask them, let them do whatever they want to do. And I can assure you that if they do what they want to do, tomorrow there will be no Pakistan on the map of the world. So because by that time, even India had become a nuclear power, number one. Okay. And this threat of destroying India nuclearly, or using those nuclear weapons, atom bombs, it wasn't going to go down well with anyone, because you attack, they attack. It's just a matter of a button. The attack happens. Same thing happened during the Cuban Missile Crisis. US and USSR both knew that it is going to be a mutually assured destruction from both the sides. We pull the trigger, they also pull it. Both of us are dead. Okay, and that's what led to the backing off of both the powers. Okay, and that's what led to no nuclear attack then. All right. So the term nuclear power is actually used as a deterrent also. Cold War was actually a term, it was described by Bernard Baruch. He said, let us not be deceived today. We are in the midst of a Cold War. And that's when we came to understand this crisis between US and USSR as Cold War. Dr. Barnett said it's a situation of hot peace, and President John F. Kennedy, he said hard and bitter peace. Okay, these were a few terms used for Cold War. Now see the distribution of world. First world countries, second world countries, third world countries. First world countries, totally developed. Second world. And that was a third world country. Year 1945. Okay. So the fight was between US and USSR, between capitalism and communism. Okay. And of course, democracy versus communism as well. Roots of the war, whites versus red, I have already told you. Okay. Soviet Union was established under 1922. Soviet, of course, won the war, and Soviet was established under Stalin. See, 1933, although we saw that 1917 US supported whites, But then 1933 relations were restored between USA and USSR. The relations were back to normal over here. So it was a very big deal. I mean, it was a big deal, and USSR is not going to completely trust US, but then they were back to normal in this time. Okay? So nothing much was happening right now. Situation worsened after World War. Okay? So I think I've told you all these things. Yeah, Churchill talked about Iron Curtain in his Fulton speech. And this particular thing I think I've done already with you. Now, US came with a few policies to combat communism. What happened is that after World War, and when you saw that Russia or USSR was speeding up and moving towards spreading communism in Eastern Europe. So what US did was US came up with a few policies to combat this communism. One of those policies was Truman Doctrine, okay, in 1947. Let's start to understand Truman Doctrine and then we'll come back over here once again. Truman Doctrine, key policy initiative of President Harry S. Truman. It was announced in a speech in March 1947. In the years following World War II, it tried to expand its influence, I told you, in Eastern Europe. And it wanted to establish communist regime over there in countries like Poland, Czechoslovakia, Hungary. US was concerned about all of this. US thought that, the spread of Poland to Eastern Europe, it's going to take no time, and Poland will come to Western Europe as well. Okay? So US became increasingly concerned about the spread of communism. US stepped in and it helped Greece and Turkey. Remember a while ago I told you that Eastern Europe was all taken by USSR, but Greece and Turkey was not, because US immediately put the Truman Doctrine over there, okay, and it saved Greece and Turkey. See, both these countries, Greece and Turkey, they were facing internal strife, okay, because the communist movements were trying to gain control within them. So Truman asked the Congress for a $400 million loan in economic and military aid to help these countries resist communist influence. And that's what he helped. That's what he did. So actually, it was not for help, but containment of communism. Okay, so this policy was less for help and more for containment. Containment of what? For the further spread of communism. Okay, if US starts to help these nations out, then these nations would be strong and communist regime would not be able to step in them. Okay, and Truman justified this also that we as Western powers, we have a moral obligation to support people who are being traumatized, who are resisting subjugation by outside pressures, but they're not able to do it. So he framed this entire thing as a global struggle between democracy and totalitarianism. He gave a very moral outlook to this struggle. The Truman Doctrine, it marked the beginning of the US policy of containment. Later on, you will see it guides the American foreign policy throughout the Cold War era. Okay? And you will also see that this very Truman Doctrine lays the foundation of an in-depth interference of US in the international affairs. Till date, US is interfering in every affair of the world. And this Truman Doctrine is what laid the basis for it. Okay? It also laid the basis for the groundwork of Marshall Plan, or European Recovery Program. Okay, announced in 1947. It was actually an economic aid to Western European countries to help them rebuild after World War II. Please try to understand Truman Doctrine. It was usually for the assistance of those regimes which were against communism. Okay. And Marshall Plan was for the Western countries. They were actually economic aids for the Western countries to rebuild themselves. They had already faced a lot of crises during the World War era. They faced a lot of destruction during the World War time, Second World War time. So to restore themselves, it was Marshall Plan, okay, economic aid to West and South European countries. But this aid was, of course, given on one condition: we give you aid, stand with us against communism. Okay? You'll also simultaneously see that US has propped up many anti-communist regimes. For example, they removed Augusto Pinochet in Chile. Okay? They're actually uprooting any communist regime throughout the world, whichever comes in their contact, trying their best to oppose Russia over here. Talking about Marshall Plan, also called European Recovery Program. Again, I told you it was a US initiative to help Western countries. It was actually started by US Secretary of State, George C. Marshall. He gave a speech in Harvard University, and that's when he outlined the proposal. See, after World War, there had been a lot of destruction, I told you. Europe was one such nation which faced a lot of destruction. Okay? And there was a constant fear that since Europe has been destroyed badly, there are chances that Russia might jump in and it might try to take advantage of that situation. So what US did, it stepped in and it tried to launch the Marshall Plan so that US could help the Western countries and the Western countries would help each other also, in order to contain in order to reshape themselves, rebuild themselves, okay, and trying to establish themselves once again after World War II. Okay, so Marshall Plan launched in 1948. It went on for 4 years. It gave assistance to 16 European countries, West European countries. Okay, initial funding request sent to Congress was only for $17 billion, but the final amount allocated was around $13 billion. Okay, if you talk about present day, it's actually equivalent to $150 billion. Soviet, as a response to Marshall Plan, it came with a Molotov Plan. Okay, later on it also came up with other organizations also, which we'll talk about. Marshall Plan, 16 nations: Austria, Belgium, Denmark, France, Greece, Iceland, Ireland, Italy, Luxembourg, Netherlands, Norway, Portugal, Sweden, Switzerland, Turkey, UK, and the Western Germany. These were the 16 nations which received assistance. Molotov Plan was also known as European Recovery Program. This was actually proposed by Foreign Minister of USSR, who was Vyacheslav Molotov. However we pronounce it, please excuse my pronunciation of these foreign names. It was announced in 1947. Molotov Plan was very close to Marshall Plan. Okay, it was like, very similar to Marshall Plan, and it was aimed at improving the economic conditions of these countries. Okay, but whoever received assistance under Molotov Plan, that nation particularly had to adopt a socialist economic system, a communist economic system. Okay, the plan also reinforced Soviet influence in political and economic affairs of recipient countries. Their idea was to integrate the Eastern Bloc countries together. Okay, their idea was that whatever countries Russia has taken under itself in Eastern Europe, they're integrated together, they're unified under Soviet leadership. Molotov Plan is what led to the coming of Komokov, Council for Mutual Economic Assistance. Okay, in 1945, Comcon was an economic organization. Okay, Comcon actually included USSR plus East European countries, Eastern Bloc. Okay, and their idea was to coordinate economic planning and development. It was an organization that was formed, just like nowadays we have organizations like, let's say what do we say, a G7 is formed. Okay, Quad is formed. Similarly, Comcon, all industries were nationalized and agriculture was collectivized in the member nations. Socialist economy, please remember, this is all socialist regime. nationalization of industries, everything's a public policy, public property. Agriculture was collectivized, okay, no private ownership. USSR used this so that this entire eastern bloc, which has been divided into so many countries, including Russia, it could be unified as one, okay. But it was later changed because these satellite nations themselves were not enjoying Comgon. And then there was a formation of Communist Information Bureau, Common Form. Okay. It was said at the same time as Molotov plan was going on. Okay. And all states which were following communism had to become a part of Common Form. Okay. What was the ideology? What was the aim of Common Form? All states follow the same line as USSR. Communism, same ideologies as USSR. That is what they wanted. Okay, that is why Common Form was formed. All right, we already had a look at the map, so we don't need to look at it again. Try to understand the Berlin blockade now. Let me explain the situation. Let's say this is Germany divided into 4 zones: US, UK, France, USSR. In this zone itself, we had Berlin. Berlin was also divided into these parts, where West Berlin was for these parts and East Berlin was supposed to belong to USSR. Okay, because it was the capital, we had to do the same division with the capital itself. Now the situation was that Stalin was so pissed off with all what was happening, the formation of Duschenmark, or formation of Bizonia, and he tried to put the blockade as a result of his frustration. Okay, so what he did was he also wanted to control the entire capital, so he blocked the supply lines of West Berlin. Food and other commodities could not step in over here. He blocked the supply line, okay, for days. So now, but US, UK and France had to supply things to their region. So they used air supplies. Okay, they used aeroplanes and helicopter to transfer those supplies, to take the supplies over there. Now what Stalin, when he saw this, that my Berlin blockade is not resulting in any destruction or any loss for these people, he had to uplift the blockade. Okay, and 1949, Germany was divided into 2 parts: East and West. East Germany, the entire part. See, Germany is not circular. So if you look at Germany, Germany is not circular. It's like this. This entire region was taken by Soviet. You had US and then UK and then France jumping up and taking these regions. Okay, the eastern part was given to Soviet, but this area was blocked. See, this area was blocked. So air supplies were sent from all over. Okay, this is what happened with Germany. After the Berlin blockade, now came the time that the Western powers had to ally, had to unify against what USSR was doing. And that is what led to the formation of North Atlantic Treaty Organization, or NATO, in the year 1949. NATO was formed as a military setup to counterweight Soviet armies. Now, what do we mean by a military setup? Try to understand. NATO, till date, works as a military setup. You attack one NATO member and all NATO members are going to come and support them. Whether they were a part of the crisis or not, whether they were a part of the war or not, they will jump in, they will step up, and they're going to take charge of the situation. Okay? So that is what we mean by a military alliance. Initially, US, UK, France, Canada, Belgium, Denmark, Iceland, Italy, Luxembourg, Netherlands, Norway, and Portugal were members. And then simultaneously, slowly and gradually, we had more members added to NATO, North Atlantic Treaty Organization. Now, what came as a counterattack to NATO? Warsaw. But before this came, a lot of things happened. 1949, NATO. 1953, Stalin died. Warsaw was 1955. So 53, Stalin had died. Tata bye bye. So now what? What was the stance? Change in leadership. All of you should know one thing very carefully. Change in the leadership of any nation, it's gonna impact that nation and even other nations which have, what are we, strategic alliances with that particular nation. That is what happened over here. Basically, change in the leadership that brought Nikita Khrushchev to power. Nikita Khrushchev, when you see, he was more or less, we could say, first of all, a very diplomatic person. He said that let's not, maintain those angry relations with the US. Let's start to maintain friendly relations with US. But this friendly relation facade was also all, yeah, it was all a facade. This claim of friendly relation was a facade. Okay, and eventually you see that Nikita is the one who signs Warsaw Pact in 1955. Okay. So 1950 to 53, a very important incident happened. Korean War. In the Korean War, the war was between North Korea and South Korea. North Korea and South Korea are separated by 38th degree parallel or 38th parallel. Okay. North Vietnam and South Vietnam are separated by 17th parallel. Please remember this. North Korea and South Korea separated by 38th parallel. So USSR and now China has also stepped in. So USSR and People's Republic of China, they backed North Korea, while US and its allies, they came to the rescue of South Korea. Okay, the war did not result into anything. It was a stalemate. What happened was actually Stalin was moving from this side and jumping into North Korea to spread communism over here. The minute US and its allies, US saw that, oh, he's now moving into Korea, US came from this side and set up its zone over here. Minor situation. Nothing great. It wasn't any civil war. It was actually a result of the clash between communism and capitalism. Communist powers were jumping here, so capitalists had to jump here. And remember, why is Korean War important when we talk about Cold War? Because this was the first military action of the Cold War. It was sparked by the June 25, 1950 invasion of South Korea by 75,000 members of the North Korean People's Army. But, it ended into a stalemate. There was a peace treaty signed. And, we saw a division of North and South Korea. And that's how Korean War ended. 1950s, I told you, Stalin died and Nikita Khrushchev, he took over. Whereas, in US, you saw Eisenhower took over. Now, Nikita, he demanded more peaceful relations with US. He gave a speech in February 1956 and he said, we are demanding a more peaceful relation with US. Even America, when they heard about this policy, they also wanted to, their outlook towards Russia to change. Okay, but we saw that, Warsaw Pact was signed by USSR against NATO. And we also saw that USSR backed guerrilla groups. They tried to overthrow colonial governments in several European nations and they tried to establish communism over there. Okay. As an attack to this, what USA was doing is, it was backing many undemocratic governments to stop this. Please understand this now. Look at the irony over here. Undemocratic governments. USA propagating democracy, backing undemocratic government just to oppose USSR and its spread of communism. It was using, a Tilha method to stop communism from spreading. Okay, so the US did this in Iran and Guatemala, Dominica, Chile, Brazil, etc. 1956 Hungarian Revolution crushed by Soviets. Okay, the revolution in Hungary was crushed by Soviets, and we also see 1956 Suez crisis. Not important for you right now. Okay, so I'm not going into the Suez crisis. If you want to know a little bit more about Suez crisis, you can jump into the CUET lecture and you can watch it. Okay. Wars in Indochina were also happening in 1950s. Indochina is not India and China, by the way. Indochina region is Vietnam, Laos, Cambodia. The French colonies were called Indochina. Okay. 1955, you will see that Russia, as a part of its friendly relation, it's winding up its military bases in Finland. Bulgaria, he meets Eisenhower at the summit in Geneva. Okay, and Russia also, it had put a veto on the admission of 16 members to the United Nations, so it lifted its veto. Okay, and allowed the entry of those 16 members to the United Nations. Okay, Cominform was abandoned. An Austrian state treaty was signed in 1955, and Austria was also divided into 4 parts. Capital? No, I'm sorry. Capital was Vienna, and once again, capital landed into the Russian hands. Okay. See, upon Austria was laid a condition. It was to be independent, proper elections were to be held there. But if there came a problem between Western and Eastern blocs, then Austria had to remain neutral in that case. Okay. But this entire thing was a facade from Russian side because, when Hungarians revolted in Budapest, the revolt was crushed by Russia. I told you. In 1956. They wanted a more democratic regime, and that revolt was crushed by Russia. And Warsaw Pact, of course, you saw, 1955. Okay, now we talk about NAM, the formation of NAM. See, I'm going to just give you an idea of how India is related to this entire situation. And you can just, this is not a part of your ISC syllabus, but let's just take an idea of it. Okay. First of all, NAM. Now, India, non-aligned movement. India, along with 4 other nations, formed non-aligned movement. Okay, deciding that we are not going to ally with either Eastern Bloc or Western Bloc. And this happened, this originated in 1955 at the Asia-Africa Bandung Conference held in Indonesia. Okay, and NAM actually played a very important role in stabilizing the economies of these nations, partly because they were economies which were a part of Commonwealth. They were liberated from colonization recently, so they did not want to be a part of any crisis right now. Okay, that's why the movement was formed. What happened is that the US was actually jumping into Hambantota port. Okay, and trying to establish its settlement over there so that it could easily jump into this part of the world to counter communism. Russia reached India because Russia, the all-weather friend of India, but if it wasn't then, Russia reached India, so India helped Russia out, and India it sent its forces into Russia. It actually, helped LTT. It asked LTT because Sri Lanka, LTTE, Tamil Tigers, Liberation Tigers, Tamil Elam. Okay, so LTTE was there in Sri Lanka, which was fighting for Tamil rights. Okay, so India aided LTTE. And as a result of which, LTT had started creating ruckus in Sri Lanka. Sri Lanka had to say, because of you, US, we are facing a problem, LTTE problem. We are not going to give you any port. Go back. That is what US did. Okay. Now, after that, what happened is Sri Lanka said, okay, now we have said that so US go away. Please help us, calm these LTTE situation. So India tried to reach out to LTTE to calm down, but now LTTE, they were now fighting not for India, but for their own rights. So eventually, India had to send its armies, its soldier, and, they had to be subdued. as a result of which you saw that Rajiv Gandhi, he was bombed later on. Okay, see, gaining Russia's military and political backing was very important for India to secure its interest. Okay, but simultaneously, India could not what do we say? India could not get into an make US its enemy. Okay, so Indira Gandhi's foreign policy, it was driven by a quest for power, aligning with the Cold War norm, but simultaneously, Jawaharlal Nehru and Indira Gandhi, they were smart enough not to align with any power, at least not to explicitly align with any power. But then, even we see a signing of peace treaty with USSR before the Indo-Pak War of 1971. So we see that this particular treaty is again a breach of what India said, that it's not going to it's not going to align. But Indira Gandhi said that, this was just to maintain a balance of power. And it's a peace treaty. It's not like, we are saying, oh, we are going to help you out throughout. No. So this was a situation going on over here. We jump to 1960s. 1960, U-2 plane incident happened. A U-2 plane of US was, what do we say, shot by Russia, as a result of which Paris summit failed. It was supposed to be between US, Soviet, UK and France. So it failed. 1961, East Germany started building a wall around West Berlin. I told you. So this wall started being constructed over here. Okay. In 1962, we saw Cuban Missile Crisis. I'll come to Cuban Missile Crisis in a while. Let's first discuss the events of 1960s. Actually, in Cuba, what happened is that the Cuban government, it underwent a revolution in 1959. And a communist leader was established, Fidel Castro. Okay, and US wanted to replace this leader. Fidel Castro, he ruled for almost 50 years in Cuba. 1962, we saw Sino-Soviet split. But this split was only because of ideological differences. China has its own form of communism. Soviet had its own form of communism. But this does not mean that China is going to go against Soviet. Please be very clear over here. It was just a split. But China was very clear that it's not going to go against Soviet. Then we had Prague Spring reforms in Czechoslovakia. Actually, Prague wanted a more democratic, it was a communist regime, but it wanted to democratize itself. Okay, and it was crushed by Soviet. Okay, and you saw Vietnam War. Again, Vietnam War we are going to discuss later. Basically, USSR and People's Republic of China, they backed North Vietnam, and North Vietnam, of course, it won against US in South Vietnam. So though Korean War was, resulted in a stalemate, Vietnam War did not. We'll discuss this in a little detail, but first let's talk about the Cuban Missile Crisis, a very important event when we talk about the World War events. All right, so next talking about the a very important event when it comes to the Cold War era, the Cuban Missile Crisis. Now try to understand the background over here. We discussed that in Cuba, we had the communist government under Fidel Castro. Communist government under Fidel Castro. This is what we discussed. The US was not quite happy about the situation. Okay, so we saw two invasions that the US tried to do. Number one was, of course, Bay of Pigs, like you call it, Bay of Pigs. And the other one was Operation Mongoose. So there were two operations that were launched against the Fidel Castro government in Cuba, Bay of Pigs and Operation Mongoose. Bay of Pigs was also there to, uproot the communist government from Cuba, and same thing was Operation Mongoose, where, Eisenhower's government was, American government was sending, what do we say, militants, terrorists in Cuba and tried to, disrupt the normal flow of, what do we say? Um, the country, the normal flow of work, or let's say, try to disrupt the normal routine of the people, the innocent people living over there. Okay, so that is what. See, Bay of Pigs was launched by Eisenhower. Mongoose was continued under Kennedy. Okay. So now we had one side we had Kennedy, other side we had Nikita Khrushchev. Okay, two sides which were there against each other. Situation in Cuba happened so that while this Operation Mongoose was going on, Nikita Khrushchev he quietly had a word with Fidel Castro and he decided to set up missiles in Cuba. This was not a very abrupt thing that was happening, or a very sudden thing that was happening. US had already set up its missiles there, in Turkey and Italy. So because US had set up missiles in Turkey and Italy, it was very close to, what do we say, Russia. So Russia decided to do the same thing with Cuba. Okay, so now both the sides they knew that missiles were properly set up. But while the missile setup was going on, US did not come to know of it. It was a very secret operation. Okay, so Nikita set it up, very secretly. Okay, October 16, US military, it launched an airstrike. It decided to launch an airstrike on Cuba. But President Kennedy, now since when he got to know about the missile thing, he was very cautious of this thing. And he said, do not launch an airstrike because we don't know when they push the button and when we are done for. So he rather said that let's do one thing. Let's go for a naval blockade. Okay. So if you put a naval blockade around Cuba, there will be no supply coming in, and in lack of supplies we can try to gain power over there. So he decided for a naval blockade. Okay, he also said that US would intercept every ship that comes to Cuba. It was kind of a naval blockade only. Now when this reached Khrushchev, he considered this as a war. Okay, as a beginning of a war. So he wrote a letter talking all things out. Okay, urging for both sides to calm down. And then there were internal things going on. There was an ambassador who the US ambassador who talked out in Russia, and things calmed down, but that is something you don't need to know as per your syllabus. So all these internal diplomatic relations, they what they did, they calmed down the situation on both sides. Otherwise, if you see, this was the first time when the United States reached DEFCON 2 level. They have their actually defense. So I think they start from DEFCON 5, then 4, 3, 2, 1. So it's like 5 is when you don't have much threat. You create a DEFCON level 5, then you have 4, 3, and then 2 is like you actually have a lot of threat. So DEFCON 2 military setup was on DEFCON 2 level. Okay, but of course I told you both the sides they withdrew their missiles later. Okay, and simultaneously they also signed a nuclear test ban treaty. Britain also joined over here. So basically, they decided that any nuclear test that would be conducted underground, not above the ground, so that we're not polluting the environment. It's not going to harm any living individual. Okay, so this was Cuban Missile Crisis. Now see, I told you, setting up of missiles on both the sides. This brought the world on a stage of a nuclear war. US pressed the button, Russia pressed the button. Done. Brinkmanship. This is what I was talking about when I talked about this thing. The characteristics of Cold War. Okay, brinkmanship. And Cuban Missile Crisis was one such aspect. Coming to, I told you that as a, what do we say, as a competition to, or as what do we say, as a retaliation to NATO, we saw the formation of Warsaw Pact. This was basically between USSR plus East European countries. All right, signed in 1955. A time when Nikita Khrushchev was saying that, he's changing his policy towards Americas, but something otherwise was seen over here. So Warsaw Pact was signed in 1955. And as a result of it, see, one side Nikita is saying that we're trying to change our outlook towards all of you. The other side, they're also signing a Warsaw Pact. So Britain, France, and US, they were very apprehensive about this entire situation, and they met in Bonn, drafted a federal constitution, and they set up the German Federal Republic. German Federal Republic in West Germany. Okay, where Konrad Adenauer became the first chancellor of the republic. Okay, now as a retaliation to it, East Germany, you moved to East Germany. East Germany was proclaimed as the German Democratic Republic by Russia itself. Okay, so this was all that was going on as a result of Warsaw Pact. So when we saw maybe going of Stalin and coming of Nikita Khrushchev would have what do we say, simplified things in the world and settle things in the global world order. It wasn't this. It just looked that it's going to happen, but it was not happening. So things were not moving towards any better. Okay, 1955, we already saw the situation. Germany was still into two parts, and there were parts who were looking to unify Germany, shifting it towards themselves. Coming to Vietnam War, a very important event, but second to Korean War. Korea was important, and yes, Vietnam too is important. Please remember these two important wars. These are prominent wars of Cold War era, the proxy wars of Cold War era. Vietnam War, it actually took place in Indochina. Indochina, I told you, Indochina was not India in China. Indochina was French colony. Laos, Cambodia, Vietnam, Indochina. So this conflict took place in Indochina, Laos, Cambodia, Vietnam from November 1 until the fall of Saigon. Now Saigon was actually the capital of South Vietnam. Okay, so this war took place for 20 years. It was indeed a complex and controversial war. It involved the communist government of North Vietnam. So North Vietnam had a communist government. Okay, I told you in case of Korean War also that the North Korea had communist government backed by Soviet and People's Republic of China. Similar thing happened in Vietnam. So North Vietnam was backed majorly by China. Russia did not have a very prominent role, but we all were fighting a proxy. Russia and US were fighting proxy wars. So, you can say that they had a role, but major role was exercised here by the communist government of China. Okay, and South Vietnam, we had the capitalist government under the three Western powers. Okay, it was a very controversial war involving these parties. Okay, see, North Vietnam, one thing, North Vietnam, that's northern part of the territory. Plus this North Vietnam had a few allies in South Vietnam, a few friends in South Vietnam. They were known as Viet Cong. Okay, together known as Viet Cong. Viet Cong, North Vietnam and its allies, Viet Cong. Okay, they were fighting against the non-communist governments of South Vietnam, and of course the principal ally was United States. So see, Vietnam had been a French colony until the first Indochina War. Okay, 1946 to 1954. This war resulted in the division of Vietnam into the communist North, led by Ho Chi Minh, and the non-communist South. Okay, now this name becomes very important. Please remember that Japan had also got its interest in Vietnam. Okay, but yes, indeed, Vietnam was a French colony until 1954. Okay, and Vietnam was hence divided into the communist North, which was led by Ho Chi Minh, and the non-communist South. Okay, Geneva Accords were signed in 1954. It divided Vietnam along the 17th parallel. Please remember, yesterday I told you, Korea, 38th parallel. Vietnam, 17th parallel. Okay? With the understanding that elections would be held in 1956 to unify the country. So they were divided, the Geneva Accords, and people were waiting that yet let the elections be held in South Vietnam, North Vietnam, and people could themselves choose where they want to go. They want a unified territory or they want a differentiated territory. That was their choice. Okay? The United States, it became involved in the conflict. So basically, United States did not want any elections in South Vietnam because they know that communism has a greater impact in the Vietnamese region. So America did not want that, an election is held and they choose their powers themselves, because somewhere or the other they knew what's going to be the outcome of the elections. So they did not want any elections, and of course they were on their run to stop the spread of communism. Okay, so US, it started giving military aid and advisors to South Vietnamese government, okay, in the early 1960s. This led to a clash, okay? First phase of war, then you immediately saw the Gulf of Tonkin incident in 1964. Basically, what happened? We had the US Navy ships in Gulf of Tonkin. You'll see Vietnamese region is here, and this area is the Gulf of Tonkin region. Gulf of Tonkin. So there were US Navy ships, okay, here, and these were attacked by North Vietnamese forces. Okay, so now Congress passed the Gulf of Tonkin resolution. This resolution gave power to Lyndon B. Johnson, the then president of the United States. He got power to use military force in Vietnam, even without declaring a war. So basically, he was saying use the force. It's like, declaring a military action. Use force, but don't declare a war. Okay, as if martial law has been passed, lathi charge has been decided. This is what was going on in Vietnam. The US, it escalated its involvement and sent a large number of troops in this conflicted region. Okay, at its peak there were almost 5 lakh American troops in Vietnam. See, a region where you particularly not having any interest, except that you do not want communism to spread. At that very region, US had sent 5 lakh American troops. That was a big deal. See, I'm sure you don't need to know this, but I'm just telling you that since even the locals were fighting, I mean local as in, the people of Vietnam, the army of Vietnam, they were also fighting. Okay, so they used the guerrilla warfare techniques, the Viet Cong. Okay, the minute guerrilla is employed, it makes it very difficult for external power to exert its domination. Guerrilla warfare is a technique, hidden warfare technique, and you cannot win against, these people who are well versed with the entire region. Okay, then came Tet Offensive in 1968. It was a major turning point in the war. Okay, although Tet Offensive was militarily unsuccessful for the North, it had a very big impact on the public opinion in US. Okay, turning many against the war. So US people were saying that US did not need to be involved in the Vietnamese war that was going on over there, but US is showing its involvement, and that is totally unnecessary. That was Tet Offensive. Okay, that that Tet Offensive shaped this entire perspective of US people towards US. Okay, the war sparked the anti-war movement in US, with protests and demonstrations becoming widespread. So people in the US, they were demonstrating that do not go ahead with the war, do not retaliate, return, and just let the situation be. Okay, but then US had to give up to the coming pressure from people, and US withdrew. We came to a ceasefire, we withdrew. Basically they had to withdraw because as it is they were not winning in Vietnam. Okay, there had been a lot of casualties also. US began withdrawing. We had the Paris Peace Accord signed in 1973, and US forces withdrew. But the war did not end over here. 1975, North Vietnam, it went into South Vietnam, it attacked the region, and this resulted in the fall of Saigon in 1975. Okay, and now Vietnam was reunified under communist control. So that was the situation during Vietnam War. All right, I hope that makes sense. I hope that's clear. Vietnam War. Next, what was the impact of Gulf of Tonkin resolution? Now see, Gulf of Tonkin resolution, it was taken by the US, the US Congress. It was a decision by US Congress that you can, intervene in the Vietnamese. I mean, they were intervening, but it was technically, that you can launch attacks on the Vietnamese people without even formally declaring war. So now, what was the impact of it? See, it gave, of course, Johnson the authority to use military force in Vietnam. Okay. This resolution was a legal justification for the escalation of US military involvement. So basically, they were trying to justify why are we interfering so much in Vietnam. With the authority that was granted by the resolution, President Johnson, he of course escalated the US involvement in Vietnam, and as a result of which there were a lot of American troops deployed in Vietnam. Like a few years ago, you saw the same situation in Afghanistan, where a lot of American troops had been deployed ever since, time immemorial. I mean, of course, um, in the middle, since the mid, I mean, during this, what do we say, the Cold War era only. After this situation of Taliban and after 9/11 thing, we had the deployment of US forces. But yes, they were deployed for a long time. This resolution, it also allowed for an escalation of the bombing campaigns against North Vietnam. Okay, the US they came up with extensive air raids, Operation Rolling Thunder. Okay, their aim was to weaken the North Vietnamese military. Okay, and support the South Vietnamese government. Now, North Vietnam is nothing communist, and this was extensively backed by China. South Vietnam, capitalist government. I won't say capitalist government, I'd rather say democratic government, or to put it more clearly, non communist government. And US wanted to support a non communist power. So basically, they took a wrong step. They justified the wrong step through a legal action. And now they are, what do we say? Plundering, raid an entire area. What do we say? I mean, destroying the entire area which is not their own. Okay, technically working just for power. The Gulf of Tonkin resolution, it widened the conflict that was going on in Vietnam. Okay, between North Vietnam and South Vietnam. Um, Resolution is often cited as an example of Congress granting broad war powers to the president. There are a lot of critics of this resolution who say that it effectively gave the president authority to conduct military operations. War was not declared. You were not supposed to do what you were doing. Had you declared war, you could have launched forces, you could have launched missiles, you could have done anything. So you don't tell us you are on a war. We don't know you're on a war. We are fighting as we should have been. But you are technically fighting a war. So without declaring a war, President Johnson was fighting a war. And this was an abuse of power in the eyes of critics. Okay, they feel that what Johnson did wasn't the right thing to do. He was technically exploiting his power. Just going to the Congress, getting a resolution done that, oh, you have the Gulf of Tonkin resolution, go, do whatever you want to. No, that doesn't justify any of your action. That is what, that was the popular opinion that time, that, the actions of Johnson were not justified. Okay. They said that, actually, please remember the US, the first democracy in the world, in the modern world, let's say. It is said that, US has a very watertight arrangement of checks and balances and a separation of powers. Unlike India, where we have, we don't have a watertight arrangement. We don't have, the system of proper checks and balance. We do keep a check on different organs of the government, but it's not a watertight arrangement. Okay? But US does have a watertight arrangement. So when it came to the US, all right, and when it came to the Gulf of Tonkin resolution, people were saying that where is the concept of checks and balances? Who's going to keep a check on the president who is, abusing his power? That was the situation right now in US. So even, let alone the people who are there around the world, the US people themselves were condemning the president for the war. Okay. Now, as the Vietnam War it escalated and the US involvement in the war deepened, people were skeptic about, what the president is wanting. Okay. There was lack of progress and there were a lot of casualties during the war, and it was all fueling an anti-war sentiment in people. Okay. So this particular resolution it became a focal point for the critics of the war. They were saying US did not need to be involved in such a situation. It was unnecessarily being involved. And see, at the end of the day, our soldiers who are fighting the war, they have a family behind them. So when you are unnecessarily sending them to a war, they don't have any, any reason, any logic to go to that particular war, and you're unnecessarily sending them to the war. That particular thing was criticized by the government itself. I'm sorry, by the people themselves. Okay, coming to the concept of de-escalation now. See, war and situation had escalated a lot with this Vietnam War thing, but simultaneously people were also seeing that you know um, America is now unnecessarily showing involvement in a lot of things around the world. As a result of, or as a show of detente between the two powers, Richard Nixon he visited China in 1972. There was a detente between US and USSR also when they signed the strategic arms limitation. They had the strategic arms limitation talks in 1972, okay, and they signed the treaty, okay, signing of the treaty. They decided basically that we are going to reduce nuclear anti-ballistic missiles. But then again, we saw a glimpse of something rising when USSR sent troops to Afghanistan to help the uniformed government. See, USSR sent it to help the government, to support communism, but US started supporting Mujahideen who fought against USSR. So basically, Russia was doing its own thing. It wasn't doing anything against America, but US jumped in to do something against America and supported Mujahideen. Tomorrow you cannot come and tell us that we've been terrorized, we've been facing an attack of terror when you're yourself supporting a terrorist. Okay, this was going on over here, and this Afghanistan situation it kept on persisting for a very long time. We'll also see how why did the de-escalation come in. See, basically by the coming of 1970s, both the sides realized a lot of things. How did they realize? Try to understand the situation now. So in 1970s, what happens? First of all, Russian economy. It's facing a setback slowly and gradually. Okay. And Russia aims to more, invest more in increasing the standard of living of people. So this is was what Russia was looking into, that our main focus should be in improving the standard of living. America had already seen a setback when it came to 1970 75 in the form of Vietnam War. America thought that we should have been more, focusing on peaceful coexistence rather than what we did. And this was major a public burden or public pressure, we could call it. Third, China. China had two things. Number one, China was afraid of its position in international politics. Where does it stand? Okay. And simultaneously, it has also, it had also broken apart. with Russia. Why? Actually, Russia's communism. So what happened was Russia started to take a very lenient stand on communism, and basically the communism they were practicing was more bending towards a friendly, thing. So China felt that Russia is actually altering the things taught by Lenin and Marx. The teachings, the communism taught by Marx and Lenin is being altered by Russia. So China, it separated itself from Russia. China said we have our own, what do we say, form of communism. We have our own version of type of communism. And Russia had its own type of communism. That was the situation that was going on right now. So among all of these things, these were the major reasons why. See, these are the three major parts, and they had their own reasons to back off. Okay. Um. Also, a very important thing: supporters of US, all those who were supporting US, they were feeling that in case a nuclear war breaks out between US and USSR, what will happen is the impact will be on us. Okay, because Europe has been the center of all the wars, the major wars till now, so we'll be impacted greatly. So they were also afraid of any nuclear war being, declared. As a matter of fact, Willy Brandt, the he was the vice chancellor of West Germany then, and he said that we need to develop better relations with East European countries. Just a minute. Yeah. So Willy Brandt, he said that let's try to develop friendly relations with East European countries. And this particular ideology or policy of his was called Ostpolitik. Okay, Ostpolitik. Helsinki agreements were signed 1975, which settled the European frontiers. Okay, Britain and France and US and USSR, they came together and they said that, okay, finally the frontiers of the borders of European countries are now all settled. Okay. Later, we saw that President Richard Nixon, he has a visit to Moscow, and Brezhnev, he visits Washington. Just check the years once, but I'm sure these are the years. Okay. See, now we would say that at this time, after these major powers, America and China and Russia, they realized a lot of things. Their present stand in the world, in the Cold War situation, and China and Russia also had the separation. So both of them were trying to now vie American attention to stand a little bit to what do we say, to propagate their ideal of communism. But they were doing it very subtly, very indirectly. Number one, okay. Simultaneously, a little bit here and there was going on between America and China, but that was only till Vietnam War. Why Vietnam War? Because China was supporting Ho Chi Minh, North Vietnam communism, whereas America was backing Chiang Kai-shek of South Vietnam. So that was one point of clash among them. But then we saw that China invited the American table tennis team to the country, and later on, America also did not use veto against the entry of China into the United Nations. Okay. President Nixon and Ford, they visited Peking in 72 and 75. Jimmy Carter, he withdrew the recognition of nationalist China. He said there is only one China, China in China, one China policy, and there is no Taiwan existing. Okay, and he also recognized the existence of People's Republic of China, the party in China right now. Okay, in 1979. So there was only little slight, clash between them. Otherwise, things settled for better between the two powers, at least till 1979. You come to 1980s. Once again, after the Afghanistan situation, Moscow and LA Olympics, they were boycotted. Okay, both the sides. Ronald Reagan, he increased military spending. Okay, now what did Ronald Reagan do? He came up with this idea of setting a missile in space. So if any country is, going against US, you just have to press the button and that missile will be launched to you from space only. Talked about the situation of Strategic Defense Initiative Plan, Star Wars. Okay, but that failed and he could not achieve it. While Reagan was investing heavily in military and science, USSR's economy was failing day by day. Okay? 1983, there was a large NATO military exercise. Okay, people again thought that this NATO military exercise is again going to, be a very huge problem when it comes to the situation between USSR and US. So people thought that this exercise might provoke USSR to use its nuclear weapons, but that did not happen. 1983, USSR is shot down a South Korean military plane, basically civilian plane. But 1985 onwards, nothing big happened because Mikhail Gorbachev, he became the General Secretary of Communist Party of USSR, and he brought out reforms in the form of, perestroika and glasnost, which you don't need to know right now. If you want to know, you can refer to the CUET lectures. So he brought out these reforms to actually improve the economy of Russia. Okay, and simultaneously we saw that USSR's economy was not doing really well. Gorbachev's reforms also calmed down US. Okay, because Gorbachev focused mainly on the upliftment of his economy and lesser focus on this thing, US economy. 1989, there were peaceful demonstrations everywhere. Okay, they were wanting a separation from USSR. The East European countries were wanting a separation from USSR, and Gorbachev did not practically do anything to suppress the revolution. Berlin Wall was, broken in 89. Germany was united, East and West Germany united. In 1991, USSR was totally dissolved. 15 subnational Soviets were formed. And that brings us to the end of the Cold War. Okay, basically, this is how the Cold War era went on. Okay, in your books, it's just given the situation till 1975 is given that practically all the powers had lost reason to fight the war, but there were a few more events that happened after that, and yet that led to the end of Cold War. Aftermath was pretty simple. US became the sole power for a few years. Okay, Russian economy suffered badly. There was conflicts in Balkan states. A persistent threat of nuclear weapons was there. But then again, that's a later thing we don't need to discuss much about. So that was pretty much it about Cold War when it comes to the syllabus of ISC. Okay, the important things, let me sum them up for you. For you, Vietnam War is important. For you, Cuban Missile Crisis is damn important. Korean War, I'm sure, I think it's not given in your book, but please, just try to connect the events. And Korean War is important, practically because, it was one of the major, and it was the first military action of the Cold War. So Korean War is important, and and the names of presidents and the leaders, that also becomes important.